Okay, so it's 2024 and we're celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary. Last year we started to plan and decided to go to Australia. Well, I wanted to see Uluru,
I wanted to swim at the Great Barrier Reef.
and in looking at the different tours available, the only one that offered both was Rhodes Scholar.
In addition to that, Rhodes Scholar also offered a tour and seeing a play at the Sydney Opera House. And that was something that I know Lylene wanted to do. So, with the only tour that was available that did all three places, we looked into and decided to do Rhodes Scholar.
So, on April 4th, we started a flight from Tampa to Dallas, and then Dallas to Sydney, and Sydney to Melbourne. A total of 16 and a half hours.
16 and a half hours was just the Dallas to
Sydney.
Sydney.
Right.
And then you throw another 3 in for the going to Dallas, and then another 2 to go from Sydney to Melbourne. And not only that, but the turbulence on the plane was something where we were going to not only lose a day for flying
Over the international date line.
yeah, but then we also couldn't sleep anyway in the plane.
Every time we got comfortable, you'd hit bumps. But we arrived in Melbourne, and there was, well, actually, we arrived in Sydney and transferred over, and we arrived in Melbourne, and they were waiting for us.
Picked up by somebody who took us from the airport to the hotel, and then that's where we met Jen. Jen was our group leader and all-around expert, as she stayed with us from the beginning to the end and was extremely knowledgeable, and even sometimes she kind of had to babysit us, I admit. They also had site coordinators and instructors at each site, each location, who really knew their stuff on our just about daily lectures and talks.
So we had a couple days in Melbourne, and one of the impressive things about Melbourne is that the light rail within the central business district was totally free. You could go anywhere in the CBD and not pay anything.
And we did take the light rail quite a few times, going to different places. I was impressed by how clean and vibrant the city was.
We went out to eat the one night. It was like 8 o'clock at night on a Wednesday, and it was packed.
The streets were packed. The restaurants were packed. Another nice thing about I don't know about nice, but another thing about Australia is there's virtually no tipping. So when you would sit down, you would order a meal, most of the time from the barcode that was on the table, and somebody would just bring you out your food and drink, and then you would also pay via your credit card, and there you go. So you had very little interaction with the waitresses, and but the bill that you got was the bill that you paid. You didn't have to do
Any math.
any advanced math to figure out what kind of tip to give. So between the cleanness of the city and the vibrance and the efficiency of how everything ran was pretty impressive.
Yeah, and it was built in the 1800s, so there was a lot of Victorian Albert stuff. There was a Royal Arcade, which was kind of like an 18th century mall. The art museum was the Albert and Victoria Museum, and there was a lot of that stuff. But the building, the architecture was beautiful.
Yeah, and walking through the city, walking through the alleys, walking through the side streets, very, very safe, very clean, also very interesting, because you never knew what you were going to find. Stores and shops, open,
Restaurants.
yeah, just in these little alleyways.
Almost every single restaurant you went to had outdoor seating. It was open to the outdoors because the weather is so beautiful.
Yeah. Now we did have a lot of rain in Melbourne, so a lot of our pictures are going to be a little cloudy. But hey, we didn't melt. It was good. We enjoyed it. So this particular tour was called An Australian Odyssey. Road Scholar did a very nice job of balancing the old and the new Australian cultures, the natural scenery, the city life, and of course the wildlife.
One of the other ladies had been shopping and recommended a store to find opals called Lightning Ridge. So we got the address and went to look for it, and we found this doorway into a hallway. And then once we went inside, there was a sign that said Lightning Ridge up the stairs. So we went up the stairs, and the guy took over the business from his grandfather. He'd been in business for 60 years. He took us all around the store and showed us how he cuts opals and shapes them. And he had animals there, and I held a lizard. And he had articles about his father being a daredevil and his grandfather helping to establish the Melbourne Zoo. It was fascinating. We ended up getting opals there. I got a black opal necklace. I got a boulder opal necklace that was carved with a bird for Michelle because she took care of the birds while we were away. Lylene got a blue opal necklace.
One of the things also that I liked about Road Scholar was they had to tack on a lot of extra plane fares because our original booking was to go from Melbourne to Alice Springs, but those flights were canceled. There was a little unrest at Alice Springs, so Qantas didn't fly there. So what we had to do was fly back to Sydney and then over to Alice Springs. So we were in the planes a lot more than what we had planned. But Road Scholar, they picked up the tab. They ate it all. So that was also another impressive piece about it.
Yeah, and they did the logistics very well because we felt a little rushed at times because they still crammed in everything that they had planned in spite of the lost days with the airlines.
Yeah. So once we got to Alice Springs, you were in like a different world. It was desert, it was warm, but it was very pleasant. It was not hot. The only issues that we really had was the flies that would go for the moisture on your face. So although they didn't hurt you, they didn't bite you, they wanted the moisture off of your eyes and mouth. So that was a little annoying, and you had to wear these you didn't have to, but most of the time we wore these little face nets that I have to admit did not make me look very attractive.
Oh, come on, they were fun. They went over your hat or under your hat and around your neck and prevented the flies from getting in your face. It didn't prevent the flies from getting anywhere else. And when you got on and off the bus, you had to make sure that there were no flies on you because you didn't want to bring the flies onto the bus with you. So there was people standing brushing you down.
Yeah, but Alice Springs was impressive in the four things that we really did there. Was the
Royal Flying Doctor Service, which is it's essentially a hospital on a plane, and they go to the far-flung regions to deliver medical care or bring people back to civilization for medical care from the outback.
The School
of the Air, same thing, and they have been doing online schooling since the 50s over shortwave radio.
And now the internet. They did leap into the 21st century. But that was impressive to see how the kids in these remote areas where there's nobody around for miles learned how they get their education. So that was very impressive too. We also did a well, I'll call it a nature park. I forget the name. I'm going to have to look it up. But to see the wildlife there stretched out was very nice. Each place that we went, Melbourne, Alice Springs, the Cairns, and Sydney, we did see nature in its glory. So we did either go to preserves or zoos or sanctuaries. So to see the penguins at night, which was a couple hours drive in Melbourne, to see the desert animals basically from in Alice Springs, to do the rainforest, and we did get to do a small zoo in Cairns, and of course we did Taronga Zoo in Sydney. And they were all very impressive.
The habitats are just amazing, and a lot of places you just walk right through the animals. Like there's no fences, there's no divide. You're right on the same level with them.
Then we went from Alice Springs. We did a 5 to 6 hour drive down to Uluru, and that was Mary's magical place.
It was amazing, and I really don't even have words. The feeling there, the sacredness to the Aboriginals was quite evident. It's 1,000 feet tall and 7 miles if you're going to drive around it. It's just incredible.
We did get to see it at sunset. We got to walk up and did some of the walkways to see where they had recent rain, which meant that the whole desert was a little greener than what it normally looks like. But the advantage and disadvantage was it was very green, so the pictures came out a little more colorful. But we saw less wild animals because they didn't have to come out to the highways to look for food. They could have been 10 feet in and we wouldn't have been able to see them.
One of the guides was kind of apologizing for it being so green. He says you're not seeing it and it's what it naturally is. And we kept saying, yeah, but everybody sees it the way it normally is. How many people get to see it when it's green? Because it doesn't happen that often. So
the next day we did do, I want to call it Catatrina. I'm going to say Cataguna, which is another rock formation. It's not a monolith like Uluru is. It is it's basically sandstone that still sits 1,000 feet up in the air, but it is broken up into various pieces. But we got to walk through one of the valleys, which was also very impressive.
And we have a picture of me standing there. It says, "Don't go beyond this point."
Yeah, so Mary made it to the end. We went to the airport at Uluru, which I didn't even know they had one, but and we flew by jet, of course, to Sydney again, stayed overnight to then go to Cairns, because the flight from
Uluru to Cairns was canceled.
Was also canceled. And again, Rhodes Scholar picked it up.
And Cairns is a beach town. Very much a resort. Big marina with lots of tourists, going out to the Great Barrier Reef, going out fishing, going out whale watching, all kinds of interesting things. The place we stayed at was absolutely gorgeous. Had a pool and a swim-up bar that we didn't get to use because of the rain.
And we were quite busy, let's face the facts. But it is, I guess, central in their rainforest, which was very impressive on how old the rainforest is. It is the oldest continuous rainforest on Earth, with more varieties of vegetation and animals than, again, anywhere on Earth. So all that stuff was very
It was
impressive.
really impressive. And we did a sky tram,
Sky rail.
down from the top of the mountain in the rainforest.
But it wasn't.
Corunda.
Corunda.
Corunda was the town we went in. We had lunch and we saw a little zoo and we all got to pet a koala.
And it's a very nice artist community. That's how I would really say how Corunda is. Lots of little shops and nooks and crannies to spend your money.
Yeah.
Then that next day we got on a boat and went out over 2 hours to go to a small island in the reef, the Great Barrier Reef. And we hit rain all the way there, but at the island and while we snorkeled and did the submersible, it was very pleasant. It was not, the weather was not bad at all.
Yeah, and the water was warm. It was 86 degrees, which was absolutely incredible.
So the water was a little murky, so we didn't see as much as we would have liked in this submersible, but we did get to snorkel and saw a pretty varied wildlife there. And since we went in 3 different directions, everybody saw different pieces of the Great Barrier Reef.
And one of the nice things Lylene said that it was the best snorkeling experience she had had because they had prescription scuba or dive masks, so she could actually see underwater, which was really nice.
With the reef protected and thousands of visitors coming to it every day, the island we were allowed to go to was about 2 hours out. There are a lot of protections and preservations in place to keep the reef intact. Again, very impressive. And granted, it was only maybe a couple 100 yards wide and long, but there had to be 1,000 birds on it of various types.
Yeah, there was brown boobies and frigates and different ones, and some of them were nesting, some of them had big fluffy babies that were bigger than them, but they were all very busy, flying around and building nests and going out to sea and bringing fish back, and it was really cool to see. I got some neat pictures.
So after a few hours of that, then we came back just in time to see flying foxes. We saw giant bats flying out in the early evening, going out to, I guess, go for dinner.
That was cool.
So that was pretty impressive.
And I found a sulfur-crested cockatoo feather.
I like the piece where the indigenous people talked and gave us a nice lecture, but it felt real. It did not feel like they were putting on any airs. I mean, we've been to places that have done that and they're just putting on a show, but this was indigenous people talking about indigenous people.
It was at the Mandingle Bay Preserve, and it's part of the Gingee Nations, and it was actually Gingee Aboriginals who were giving the talk. They're called Gingee Rangers. They introduced us to the protected area, showed us around. And then they performed a welcome ceremony where they mixed up some kind of root and berry and put it in 5 dots across your forehead and then across your nose. And that was a welcome ceremony for women only, so the men couldn't participate. And then they have this thing called a soap plant, and you break it up into little pieces, the leaves of it, and then you soak them, put them in water and rub your hands, and it creates suds. And so I got to do that. It was very cool. They had pictures of their elders and a shield, a spear, and different implements for catching fish and so on. It was really, really interesting, and the two who were giving the talk said in years to come they hope to expand the talk and the walk to include more of the land so that people really get a feel for how they lived. And she said most of the people still live on the shores of the bay, that they don't have actual houses, that they live on the bay and live off the bay, which is really cool.
So then we went from, the next morning, we flew finally to Sydney to do Sydney, which was pretty impressive in its own right, in that it's a lot of bays and inlets. And Sydney was, of course, where the prisoners went. Right, Britain had to, after they couldn't send their prisoners to America anymore, which we learned, some of us never knew that that's where the British sent their prisoners before they got to send them to Australia. But they did a nice historical piece showing the buildings that the prisoners had to build and live in, and what else? And actually, I guess here we could say about the indigenous people. I am really impressed on how Australia treats their indigenous people and what they're doing now.
In front of the beginning of every tour, of every lecture, every flight, like at the start of anything, the narrator, the lecturer, whoever will say, I want to take a moment to honor the original caretakers of the land, and then they would name the tribe who lived on that particular land, and also honor the elders, past, present, and emerging.
And that happened everywhere, from Qantas Airlines to the play that we saw at Sydney. It was impressive to see them honoring the indigenous people.
I don't know in society itself how much progress they've made as far as inclusiveness, but this is a great start, what they're doing. Just making everybody aware that there were people here before the colonizers.
One thing about Sydney is it did seem older, and when we came from the airport, the streets seemed narrower, and that there wasn't as much space. You kind of felt a little claustrophobic going through town.
Yeah, and a lot of the ground floor, say apartments, stores, whatever, were all dark. It was, the people living in the upper apartments were there, but the bottom ones were not occupied.
It was interesting in that we took a bus to the zoo, but we took a ferry from the zoo to the Opera House for the tour.
And the tour of the Opera House was wonderful. They took us through several of the theaters, and one of the theaters was having a rehearsal of modern dance, which was very, very neat. But of course, we were not allowed to take pictures.
Yeah, but we did get to sit and watch it for a little bit, and we were quiet.
That night we went to the show, which was West Side Story. It was not in the Opera House. It was in the Botanical Gardens, but put on by the Sydney Opera Company.
It was an outside venue and it rained that day, so like the seats were wet, and I was a little disappointed that they didn't clean off the seats for as much as those tickets were to sit there. But we were lucky in that it did not rain during the show.
And the show was very, very close to the original. The performers were outstanding, especially the person who played Maria. She had such a voice you wouldn't believe.
A very operatic voice.
Unfortunately, Tony was a singer, not an opera singer, and he didn't quite match up to her, but the show was wonderful. And they, even at the close of the first act, after the gang fight, they had a police car with lights and sirens going past the stage.
It was very cute. Yeah, they did a nice job, I have to admit. We did cross the bridge and climbed up to one of the pillars.
Yeah, they had a museum and a lookout in one of the pylons, which was kind of cool. 200 steps, and I made it to the top.
Yes, she did. And unfortunately, my camera stopped working, so I did get a picture of my honey bun up at the top going, hey, I made it.
We did not walk the upper parts of the bridge because that's a separate charge, and I think she said it was like $300 a person. And I would say probably half of the group that we were with would not want it to do it because it was pretty high.
And then we walked around. There's a portion of the city called the Rocks, which is where the convicts mined and chipped away the rocks to build the barracks that they lived in.
And other buildings, yes.
And it was incredible.
Our excitement coming back was the fact that when we flew into Dallas and landed, we found out immediately that our flight from Dallas to Tampa was already canceled. And we hurried. We tried to book a later flight, which we did. Waited another 6 hours at the Dallas airport. But American, at the last second, canceled that flight because the pilots had already used up their time. So people who wanted to stay with American Airlines were booking days out in advance because there was so few flights out, and I can't believe Dallas airport could not handle the fact that their control tower got hit by lightning and knocked everything out and put everything out of whack for days and days. We ended up booking a flight from Southwest. We Ubered over around midnight to Love Field, and then took Southwest home. So we lost 2 days of sleep, but we did get home.